Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome back to season 2 of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast where we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. I am so excited to have another video podcast on here. It's been, as I said, one of my goals in 2024, and I'm really excited to see that all happening. Please do let me know your thoughts and your feedback on the video podcast as well, because I think, as the poll suggested at the end of last year, there's definitely a mix in terms of what the listeners want. So I'm going to try and incorporate that over this year. So video podcast for those who enjoy it, but for those who perhaps, are not too bothered about which one it is, for you to listen to it through the audio episode as well. So today's episode is one that I'm super excited about, and it's with one of my all-time favorite people. Our guest today is Olivia Wilson-Bushell, a pro bono attorney at Skadden. Now, we haven't had someone from Skadden for a while, and I thought that it was about time to bring someone back. And I genuinely think that Olivia's journey and her role is so interesting, and definitely something that was worth talking about. Olivia graduated with a law degree from the University of Oxford in 2015 before completing her LPC the following year, and then joined Skadden as a trainee. She qualified as a lawyer within the corporate restructuring team, something we dive into during the episode first of all, before looking at her pro bono journey. Now, in 2020, Olivia became a full-time pro bono attorney at the firm and has been there ever since. This is the point where I met Olivia over the summer when we originally had that conversation, and when I learned about her journey and what that pivot looked like, I knew that more people needed to listen to this, because it was just so interesting and such a compelling reason as to why she knew that she wanted to go down this path. Now, during our conversation, we firstly discussed why Olivia wanted to train at Skadden, and then we look out on the pro bono side, some of the most memorable things she's done so far and some of her favourite highlights, which was so amazing to listen to. I hope that you really enjoy this conversation, and I hope that you take a lot out of it. But for now, I'm going to say I'll see you right at the end.
Hi, Olivia, and welcome to Commerce Meets Law. Super excited to have you on today. And as always, it's always lovely to have someone from Skadden. So to start off with, we always have a bit of an introductory question on the podcast. So in your opinion, what is your superpower?
Hi, Shreya. Delighted to be here. I love this question. I think I have a really good memory for little things that people tell me. So, for example, I will remember the name of a colleague's dog, and then 5 years later in a networking environment, it can be really helpful when I say, hey, how's Monty doing? So yeah, that's my superpower.
I really like that. I think we always love when people remember sort of little personal details. So that's really lovely. And I always like to start sort of, at that point where your interest in sort of law and that sort of stuff first began. I think it helps to inform later decisions. So for you, when did your interest in law first begin and sort of first emerge?
So there was no big moment where the light bulb flicked on for me, where I thought it's my destiny to become a lawyer. But I always enjoyed essay writing and debating at school, and was a bit of a generalist in the subjects I enjoyed. So when a few teachers at my secondary school started planting the idea in my head of, have you considered law? It kind of joined up the dots in my head and gave me the confidence to actually go ahead and make those applications for law. And I'm really glad I did. I loved studying law.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that there is always, there's so much of, especially I think during school, the teachers and the impact that your teachers have or certain subjects have that help you sort of inform later decisions, particularly when it comes to law, because I think most people don't tend to study law until they get to university. And so it's those key subjects which then allow you to think, okay, maybe this is a potential path. And you decided to end up studying law at Oxford. In terms of, I guess, from the perspective of it is, an aspirational university for a lot of people to go to, what was your sort of experience in terms of the application process, and how did you find your time at Oxford compared to the expectations you perhaps had before you entered the university?
It's a great question. So I went to a state school down in Devon, so was made aware of various social mobility programs that students interested in Oxford and Cambridge ran. So I applied for a program called Unique, spelt UNIQ, during which I spent a week at Oxford University as if I was a student. So I shadowed undergraduates there. I went to their lectures, I lived in the accommodation, and generally immersed myself in the city and the university. And I completely fell in love with it in those 5 days. So it was a huge part because of that program that I then went ahead and applied for Oxford itself as an undergrad course. And then in terms of the myths, I think, and I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking this, I was worried that I wouldn't find people like me there because of the sort of stereotype you often get about Oxbridge. And as you say, it is an aspirational university that lots of people really sort of train for. But I guess looking at my own life, 10 years later, I've just married my husband, who was my tutorial partner at Oxford, and my bridesmaid was one of the first people I bumped into in the corridor in my college there. So I actually found the people I met really diverse, all different backgrounds, and just really wonderful, down-to-earth people. So yeah, generally a really good experience. Worked hard, but had a lovely time.
Yeah, and I think that would be really nice for a lot of people to hear, especially those from a similar background to you who have been to, a state school, perhaps not in one of the, maybe from a lower socioeconomic background. And for them, whilst academics is a strong, point for them, perhaps other factors aren't. And so knowing that they can still have a place, at university like Oxford, I think is great to hear. And I think also since that time, a lot of changes have been made and things are constantly improving. So I think it can only sort of get better from that point on. And I guess when you were at university, when did that sort of first point begin when you thought, okay, I'm trying to think about what to do afterwards? When did you first think about what the career in law possibly could be?
I think I was quite keen. So I was considering my different paths quite early. So I was doing insight days in my first year. I was applying for vacation schemes in my second year. I was part of the Bar Society and the Law Society. So I could get a real mix of exposure to help me decide what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think that is really key at university because I think that there is so much on offer and sort of to do as well. So it's like as much as you can sort of get involved with. And there is that key decision point, especially, when you're studying law. Are you going down the solicitor route? Are you going down the barrister route? Or are you considering perhaps a path outside of law? When did you first perhaps make that distinction of which path is going to be the one for you?
So I was actually the president of the Oxford Bar Society. People always think I mean drinking bar, but no, the barrister bar. So in my head, I thought, hey, look, I love advocacy. I love debating. I love mooting. I'm going to go down that route. So I put a lot of my time into the Bar Society specifically. Did a mini pupillage. And actually, the more I exposed myself to that side of things, the more I realized it was going to be, personally for me, pretty hard work as a graduate going into that route. Whereas as I started to go to the solicitor insight days, I realized actually it's really nice doing a grad scheme and knowing the structure of each day. And then also I started to learn more about pro bono and the fact that I didn't necessarily have to pick between going and doing a training contract at a nonprofit. I could actually do my training contract at a city firm and also get the exposure to the family and immigration work that I was pretty desperate to do as a junior lawyer one day.
Yeah, and I think that's going to reflect in our later conversation when we do talk about your current role. But just before we sort of get to that, I think commercial law, again, is one of those areas which, of course, a lot of people want to get into and perhaps is one that they're thinking about even before they know what it is because they hear so much about it around them. So what was your first introduction to commercial law, and did you consider any other routes before you got there?
I got exposure to commercial law much earlier, I think, than a lot of students. So when I did the Unique program, I was 17. And we spent a day in a big city law firm in London. So I got that exposure very early. And I loved what I saw because I went into this office and it wasn't just a job that you clock in and out of. It was a whole culture and a lifestyle. People had hobbies, built within the law firm, and they were doing things they loved and cared about in their spare time, whether that was work experience with kids or reading with children or pro bono and charity work. And the fact that that could be built in kind of swung it for me pretty early on. Sort of city law felt like you were being looked after, I suppose, which is really comforting if you think you want to go into that route sort of as a young graduate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is such a key element, because I think the one thing that a lot of people say is, oh, if you're going to commercial law, be prepared for a lot of long hours and be prepared to, be working a lot of the time. So if you know that the culture and, the firm itself is going to look after you, think, okay, that might make it a bit more manageable, compared to the number of hours I'm sort of spending there. So speaking a little bit about, especially since a lot of our listeners are ones who are currently in that sort of back scheme cycle or are looking for those doing those training contract applications, when did you first start applying for vacation schemes, and what did your sort of success look like in that first cycle?
So I applied for vacation schemes during my second year of university, and then I completed 2 vacation schemes that summer, one at a UK firm and one at Skadden, the US firm I ended up at, like you. In terms of how I decided which to apply for, I read Chambers Student quite a lot to get a feel for the firms I was applying for. And I always say to prospective students, go beyond the website, listen to podcasts, go to insight days, do whatever you can to get a feel for the firm before you put the energy into doing the applications, because they do take a lot of time, and you want one that is a good fit for you. And I got a lot of first-hand information from students in the year above me at university. So students that had already secured training contracts and done vacation schemes. And they were really, really helpful to helping me decide where to put my time and energy into the application cycle. I was lucky that I only did one application cycle. So I got my Skadden offer. But I did loads of applications, like we're talking 20, 30 written applications. Had a handful of interviews, and that led to 2 vacation schemes itself. So, don't be disheartened, anyone listening to this. It's just part of it, right? I don't know anybody that has secured interviews for every application they did.
Yeah, definitely. And on that point of number of applications, there is, a lot of conflicting advice on that. Of some people say actually make 2 or 3 really good applications and go for it, and some people say make as many as you can, because the more you do, the better you get. So what's your take on the quality versus quantity on applications?
I think I probably went straight down the middle of those 2 approaches, actually. I think personally, I would say it depends on your own confidence levels. I was very nervous, and I think I didn't know what the firms were looking for because it was my first cycle. So I preferred to do numbers, because then I wouldn't kick myself if I'd only done 2 and didn't get interviews. But if you can sort of, I guess, cope with the pressure you put on yourself, if you only want to do 2 or 3, great. I personally still would do more than a handful, really, because you only get a cycle a year, right? So you want to put all the energy you can spare into them, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. And for anyone is at university, so you did a lot of these in your sort of second year, and law anywhere can be demanding, but law, especially at Oxford, I assume is sort of a very, very demanding, challenging sort of time that you are spending as well as doing everything else. What would be your tip in terms of trying to balance applications and doing those kind of law firm experiences with your academics and sort of having somewhat of a social life as well?
I would say university is really mentally challenging anyway. And I am a massive advocate of self-care. Look after yourself. You're not going to be a good trainee lawyer if you didn't take care of yourself in those years prior. So don't push yourself, right to the limits that you can. My husband actually is a great comparison, because he's also a lawyer, and he watched me do my applications in second year and he didn't do any. And we are in the exact same situation now. So, we're both lawyers in London. So I think don't rush as well, right? There's no point doing 20 applications, securing an offer, and then it not being the right fit for you.
Yeah.
So if it makes more sense to do a couple, test the waters, schedule it so that you still got ample time to look after yourself and study, that is 100% the right way to go. It's a long career, law, as well, right? So I just think, yeah, don't rush.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think especially now, I feel like every year, sort of, inside schemes, all these things, they start coming earlier and earlier. And a lot of people feel that pressure as soon as they've got to university to feel like they have to know what is it they have to do. And I think understanding that actually this is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and knowing that, you can take your time with it. And that's probably better so that you feel like you're actually somewhere where you belong, which I think brings us nicely onto talking about Skadden and your role at Skadden. So when did you sort of first come across the firm, and why did you originally decide to make an application?
I was really drawn to US firms from the outset at university, and I'm sure lots of people think, oh, you were doing it, you were focused on that because they pay really high salaries, but actually it wasn't that. There were two main reasons. I knew they had a brilliant pro bono culture. American firms are fantastic on that front, and I wanted to be part of that. And the second thing that drew me to Skadden was intakes of trainees are smaller. And I personally didn't want to feel a bit lost in a large intake. So being one of 9 trainees was just such an appealing concept to me. So yeah, pro bono, small intakes, that's what really swung it for me with Skadden.
Yeah, and I think I can definitely sort of, relate to that. I think personally, having gone into it, there was a lot of information out there about sort of Magic Circle or Silver Circle or just UK firms in general. But I think, if anything, there were misconceptions about US firms or things that people had said, but there wasn't really any first-hand accounts of what people's experiences were. So I think that highlighting that is super key, and knowing that there isn't a right path. It's just what's the right path for you. And I think understanding that is so important, especially when there's so many different things that people are saying to you, and you're kind of trying to navigate through that as well. So when you sort of did your VAC scheme and at the end had the offer, what do you think made you successful in terms of getting through the application, but then also being impressive during that VAC scheme?
So I think there is no magic formula. There's no 5 words I can say that will mean you'll smash it as a vacation schemer, but I think it actually is a lot more simple in terms of thinking or getting in the head of the people at the firm, which is the people at the law firm you're doing a vacation scheme at. They want to share an office with a junior that is interested to learn and keen and a nice person, right? It's not, because the base level is, if you've got the vacation scheme, your academics are on point, and you've got all of the sort of well-rounded elements they want. So when you get to your vacation scheme, I just think personality and respect and being a nice person plays in really heavily. So don't see the other vacation scheme students as fierce competitors. Treat everyone you come into contact with respect. Support staff like secretaries and the IT team, because you will rely really heavily on them if you do get the training contract. So that was my biggest advice. I think, have a smile on your face, be keen to learn, admit when you don't know the answer. I think that took me the distance myself personally.
Yeah, definitely. And, we had Matt on the podcast during season 1, and he echoed something very similar of, most firms aren't necessarily looking for one particular type of person. It's just, someone who, like you said, is willing to work hard, but also willing to ask questions when they're unsure, rather than trying to keep it all within themselves. Because ultimately, when you start working, it is a steep learning curve, and there is sort of lots that you're taking on at the same time. So casting your mind back to being a trainee, could you tell us a little bit about the seats you did and sort of the key differences that you found between them?
Yeah, absolutely. Feels like a distant memory now. So I completed seats in banking, litigation, corporate restructuring, and funds in that order. I was very grateful actually to get such a broad range of seats. That was great for me. And in terms of the differences, my personal experience, just I suppose on the really key bits, was from my own exposure. Banking involved lots of organization and coordinating local council and security documents. So it was really great if you love that sort of micromanaging and people management. Then when I shifted to litigation, that involved lots of client interviews and research. So it was great if you wanted to sort of have one task to focus out on your desk for the day. Then corporate restructuring was really the jack of all trades. It was quite a quirky seat for me. I didn't quite know what deal I would be doing. You know, one deal might be a court-based one, the next could be transactional. And then my fourth seat was funds, and that was very technical. I was glad I did that later in my training contract, and that was lots of contract law in a really great smaller team. And I enjoyed all four of my seats, genuinely, hand on heart. So deciding where to qualify was actually really difficult for me.
Yeah, and you know, I think one of the key pieces of advice that you get especially when you first start as a trainee, is having that open mind and not, you know, kind of being restricted to thinking, I'm only going to do transactional seats, you're only going to do a certain type of seat. Did you envisage the seats that you ended up doing, or did you have a very different mindset when you first started your training contract in terms of what seats you were going to do over those 2 years?
I was convinced I would be a litigator. I think maybe I still had that university student, you did bar society, you're going to be a litigator mindset. And I really loved the seat. I loved the research and sitting in on client interviews. But actually, when it came down to making the decision for myself personally, I wanted a seat with a bit more of a mix of the types of day that I would have. So yeah, I think 100% echo what you say, and I'm sure everyone says it, but be open-minded, and don't pick departments based on people is another thing I would say, because you know, teams change, whereas the work will stay the same. And that is what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's something you get told even when you're, you know, sort of at school, university. Don't choose your modules like necessarily based on the teachers or, you know, your friends doing it, because all of that can change, but the actual content of it isn't. And so that's probably the most important element. And you did say that, you know, sort of you enjoyed all your seats. So why did you ultimately decide to qualify into restructuring in terms of sort of the key factors that played into it?
I think it was because I was so indecisive in whether I wanted to be a transactional lawyer or a disputes lawyer. And corporate restructuring quite literally offered me the perfect blend of both. I had two main matters that I worked on while I was a trainee in the corporate restructuring team. One was a court procedure and one was a transactional restructuring. So I loved the fact that I could be drafting a witness statement one day, and then the next day I could be managing local counsel and drafting security documents. So really nice blend for me personally.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of, you know, really interesting that in that sense of a lot of people find perhaps that they do one or the other really well. And for some, it's actually, I want a bit of both. And so knowing which seats offer that is so key. Could you tell us a little bit about, I think you've given us a little insight there, but perhaps what a day or a few days in your life may look like when you were within the restructuring team as an associate, in terms of the tasks you did and how that sort of panned out over the day?
Yeah, sure. Again, it depended whether I was on sort of a disputes piece or a transactional piece. If it was a disputes piece, for people listening that don't know, corporate restructuring is sort of the pre-insolvency stage for a company. So we help organizations that are looking to restructure to help their cash flow and liquidity. So if I was working on a disputes piece, I might go into the office, draft some letters to go to the other side, go to the courts in London to listen in on the sort of admin hearings. And then on the flip side, if I was on a transactional matter, and that was more of the bulk during the time I was in the team, I would go in, I would do a lot of managing local counsel, similar to the banking team, which I really enjoyed, picking up the phone to lawyers based in, let's say, Switzerland or a different jurisdiction, joining the calls with all of the other members of the team at Skadden and the client to work through strategy and bounce around different ideas on what type of restructuring would fit them most. It's a really creative team, and I think I really thrived on the energy when a new matter would come in and you'd see the senior members of the team sort of swarm around and start planning the different structures that would work for that organization. And it's really nice being part of that.
Yeah, definitely. And from what you've explained, and kind of I can see that it was a kind of a time that you really enjoyed, and so obviously the next step seemed like it was quite a drastic one, but perhaps one that you had always had an interest in as well. So when in 2020 you decided actually you're going to go fully into the pro bono side at the firm, what did that process look like in terms of conversations that you had, or how did you get to that decision finally?
Yeah, so like you alluded to, I think in the back of my head, I always knew I wanted to be in the non-profit world in some capacity. So my electives at university were European human rights and medical law. I've always been big on the volunteering, and I just feel like it's a privilege to practice law. And I personally wanted to utilize the experience I had to help people that don't qualify for legal aid and couldn't afford a lawyer. And Skadden from the outset, always made that possible for me in some capacity, which was great. But then my predecessor, so I'm a pro bono attorney now, which means I manage pro bono. And the woman that had my role before me was in it for 10 years, loved the job. And when she left the firm in 2020, it meant the role was up for grabs. And I sort of had this sudden realization that actually maybe being a pro bono lawyer is the perfect role, right? Because you've still got that security of being in a city firm and you're doing nonprofit work. And the idea that you're not just a lawyer doing nonprofit work, you're a lawyer mobilizing 200 other lawyers to do nonprofit work was really exciting, and something that I couldn't let pass me by. So I had a conversation with one of the partner in my corporate restructuring team, who was really supportive, and I went through the usual sort of rounds of interview for the role and got it, and have never looked back.
Yeah, and I remember when sort of I had that conversation with you, and sort of during my vac scheme, and I found that so interesting that you'd sort of made that switch, but like you said, there was always sort of that interest. For anyone who's probably thinking that's that sounds amazing, but in terms of the logistics of it and sort of the fact that the money, or sort of pro bono is entirely for on a volunteering basis, and how you normally hear of it is that firms are using the money that they are billing their clients to then sort of engineer and help nonprofits. How does your role work in that sort of sense?
Sure. So Skadden, as a global law firm, has made a commitment and does every year that 3 to 5% of all work our lawyers do will be on a pro bono basis, which means we don't charge our clients. All the hours that our lawyers do on pro bono still count towards their end of year targets and their bonuses. So for our lawyers, it's not that they're taking home less money because they haven't charged their pro bono clients. It's very much part of the structure of just how our lawyers record their time. So I source pro bono opportunities, I develop new clinics with charities, and then I also build an internal culture which focuses on the importance of pro bono. And then I support our lawyers as well on the legal side. So I am a qualified lawyer. I spend some time in the week as well advising at the domestic violence clinic or assisting children with their citizenship applications. So it's really sort of a mixture of admin, supervision, and managing.
Yeah, and this might seem like a really sort of basic question, but I think pro bono is a word that a lot of people talk about, whether it's from the time when they start making applications to then as their role as a lawyer. But I think pro bono with a lot of firms can be a lot of different things. So at Skadden, what does pro bono actually mean, and what comes under that heading of counting as pro bono work?
It's a really good question. And as you say, every firm will frame that question differently. At Skadden, pro bono is the free legal advice and representation we give to low-income individuals and non-profit organizations. So that excludes CSR, which is sort of non-legal charity work, like work experience programs and reading with children, fundraising. It's very much our lawyers using their legal skills, whether that's corporate skills or immigration and family skills that they do under the supervision of external lawyers, always for free. And we don't limit it just to our attorneys. So we are big advocates at Skadden of utilising the skills of our professional staff to support legal projects. So in the same way our professional staff offer support to our lawyers in their day-to-day practice, we love and welcome that support they also provide on pro bono legal matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spoke a little bit earlier about your day when you were in the corporate restructuring team and what that looked like. So compared to that, if we draw a little comparison, what does your day look like now in terms of what you get up to and perhaps what the hours are like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can take today as an example, given it's a Friday afternoon. So this morning I went and met with a founder of a charity that we work with, where we provide representation to litigants in person in the family courts in London. So we strategized our plan for 2024, discussed staffing, possible expansions of our project, feedback from the lawyers and the clients and the court. Then I would come back to my desk for the afternoon and field questions from our lawyers. So there's a lot of being reactionary in pro bono, because pro bono clients, are often very vulnerable, and we are turning applications quite quickly for them. So I'll field some questions on, legal points on a housing query, or where to find some templates, or has somebody assisted with this corporate structuring fact pattern in the past, and can I touch base with them? Then I'll spend a bit of time responding to emails, reviewing engagement letters, onboarding new clients, scheduling training for our lawyers. And then I speak regularly with our US pro bono team. So I'm the only full-time pro bono lawyer at Skadden outside of the US, but I work really closely with the US team, because we are very much sort of a one global pro bono team. So some of my time is just carved out catching up with them as well. And that's a typical day, and they always look different.
Yeah, I think that's the best part about it, right? I think having that time when you can be, having some things that happen every day and having the structure, but also having things that you're looking forward to each day. I think that's the balance we're all trying to strike. From a trainee's perspective, someone walking into the firm and someone who's really interested in pro bono, are trainees allowed to sort of, or do they have the opportunity to bring new ideas for charities or kind of, organizations that they feel like the firm should support?
We love new ideas, and there is no hierarchy when it comes to pro bono. That goes for being part of a case team, but also referring and sourcing work yourself. So to the extent our trainees have an area of legal need that is something that really they feel strongly about assisting on, they can come to me and we'll do some brainstorming on organizations that could be a good fit. Or if they know of organizations already from colleagues, family members, they can also bring that to me, and I can scope out whether it would be a good fit for the firm. So yeah, we love getting our trainees involved in that capacity. And then we also do pretty much expect our trainees to get involved in pro bono. It's seen as a really important part of their sort of upskilling generally as a lawyer, and the fact that they can lead client interviews and draft witness statements and take a first stab at doing a legal structuring memo is all very, very transferable skills for their billable practice. I also think, and this is something I think is really important, I encourage our trainees to seek out the pro bono that interests them. So just because they are sat with their supervisor and sharing an office doesn't mean they only have to do the pro bono work that their supervisor is working on, because you might be really interested in immigration specifically. So if your supervisor isn't working on immigration, that means you shouldn't have shouldn't mean you should be deprived of the opportunity in getting involved in that space. So it's a very independent part of being a junior in a law firm, the fact that you can get involved in whatever really appeals to you.
Yeah, and I think that's incredible, because I think, as when you do join as a trainee, it is a big transition from university where you have a lot of freedom. Of course you have modules and assignments, but how you structure your day, what you do with it. And when you do go into work, whether that's any sort of grad role, it suddenly feels like you're sort of back at school, where you've got key deadlines, you've got supervised, you've got sort of, things on commitments on your time. But pro bono, again, is a way for you to have that independence and be able to sort of do what you want with it. Now, there's so many initiatives, sort of going on at the same time. And I think if we start talking about all of them, we'd probably be here for a number of hours. But one that I specifically wanted to talk about was the JUST program. So could you tell us a little bit about what the JUST program is and who it's targeted at specifically?
I would love to. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So the Skadden JUST program is administered by a wonderful organization called the Legal Education Foundation. And what the program does is it provides an entry point for very bright graduates that are looking to pursue a legal career, specifically in social welfare in the UK. So it's graduates that don't want to become a city solicitor and they don't want to become a barrister. So they want to go and do a training contract at a charity or a non-profit law centre in the UK. The programme was sort of born out of our US Skadden Fellowship, which is really focused on training the next generation of lawyers to become leaders in their field and really important advocates for access to justice. And the way it works is Skadden sponsors the cost of that trainee for the duration of their training contract, which they complete at a non-profit. But then, as well as working at that non-profit, they get the exposure to Skadden life in some capacity. So they can join junior training and pro bono training that we offer internally. They will often come to Skadden events. So we had our JUST program trainees at a women's breakfast earlier this year and the Skadden Christmas party. And then we also support them generally in ancillary costs. So let's be real, budgets are really tight at charities. If a JUST program trainee wants to attend training in another city that's being provided on a particular area of law, hopefully Skadden can cover that cost for them so that they're still getting the exposure and the training that they want to get during that training contract. So we're on our 4th cycle now. We've got Susie, who has just qualified, well, not just, coming into a year, qualified as an immigration solicitor up in Manchester. We've got Ailey, who's just about to finish her training contract in Scotland. And then we've got Simi, who is enjoying her first year as a trainee in Norfolk. And next year we'll be heading to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, for the next JUST program trainee. So we hope to have the successes of the US program, which has been wonderful. They got more than 700 fellows out in Skadden's US offices. So watch this space, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sounds incredible because I think that, a lot of people, of course, talk about the traditional TC routes and that sort of thing. And I think that it's important to highlight that there are other pathways out there. And if you do have other interests, then firms are doing things to sort of change that and, allow people to still be qualified and become lawyers, but in areas which they're truly passionate about. So from an application perspective, what does the application for the program look like? And sort of, do you have any idea in terms of how many people apply and how many get selected at the end?
Yeah, so like I say, the program is administered by an organization called the Legal Education Foundation, and they have about, 20, 30 non-profits that host one trainee each. So Skadden sponsors one of those trainees. So in terms of the application, candidates have to have the LPC or SQE under their belt already. And once they have that, they can then apply directly via that host organization. Then there are interviews in sort of the January, February of that cycle. Skadden sits in on those interviews as well as an observer. And then the successful candidate will then start their training contract in the April of that year. In terms of numbers, it's really tough, right? Because every year it differs. Realistically, application numbers are lower for non-profit training contract roles. And part of this Skadden JUST program is to encourage and increase that sort of desirability around doing a training contract at a non-profit, because you get some of those city perks in terms of exposure and training and support networks. charities already do an incredible job of providing that, but naturally intakes are smaller, funding is limited. But it's something that's really worth exploring for graduates that are pretty set on knowing they don't want to be a city lawyer or a barrister. This is a really good opportunity to get first-hand experience at a non-profit organisation and qualify as a solicitor after 2 years.
Yeah, and I think that like you said, especially for someone who knows that that is their route, I think that is such an incredible sort of position for them to be in, and firms supporting it from a financial perspective is needed, to ensure that they have the best experience possible as well. From a training contract perspective, if we think of a traditional training contract having 4 different seats, when they are at these charities, does that look a little bit different in terms of the different seats they do, or is it a very similar experience?
It's a really good question. Sadly, I don't have a very simple answer for you. It depends totally on the host organization. So one of our trainees did rotate. So she would spend 6 months in 4 different departments, just like a city lawyer would. But those departments were obviously different. So she spent time in an anti-trafficking seat and an immigration seat and a women's rights seat. Whereas another one of our trainees did a full 2 years just in immigration. So I think there are sort of SRA requirements in what you have to complete during those 2 years, but what that looks like in practice really differs. So it could be rotations, could be one main department. But it's always sort of a standard 2 years. You're supervised by, a qualified lawyer at the organization.
Yeah, and kind of widening out slightly in terms of, I think these initiatives as a whole are so important. I think are sort of growing in numbers and hopefully will carry on evolving. But I think there's always room for improvement. So on a kind of whole perspective, if you just look at law firms as a whole, perhaps in the UK, what do you think law firms can do more of in the pro bono space to ensure that we're really using the resources that we do have at our hands to, kind of really make a difference in those local communities?
Love that question. I think law firms in the UK are actually doing a really good job right now at making pro bono and CSR a really core part of the firm culture. I think it really starts with hiring someone to actually manage and coordinate pro bono within the office, because relying on fee earners alone can be really tricky because they have a day job to focus on. It's not the scope of their role. So I think once you have a committed person in that role who can focus on bringing charity and pro bono and social mobility opportunities, that mobilization really quickly follows and you end up with a pretty wonderful pro bono culture. I also think, and I know this firsthand, you have to have buy-in from your senior leadership. So the partners at Skadden are really critical to the success of our pro bono program. They are actively involved in the substantive work, the strategy, encouraging other lawyers to get involved. And that culture just trickles down really organically to all levels. And I am very grateful that we have senior leadership that have decided that actually pro bono is just part of Skadden. That's how we roll. That's how we do it. So main 2 takeaways: hire someone like me at every firm, or more, multiple, why not? And also, have great partners that really care on that side.
Yeah, and I think that is so key in terms of that leadership element is so important, because ultimately they're doing sort of that, building that vision and building that, movement of knowing where to take it forward. And so that is so key. As we are, going into a new year, from a personal perspective for you, what do you sort of want to do more of in your role next year? And, kind of what would be a goal or an aspiration for 2024?
Oh, I like that question. I think expansion always. I decided to trial a housing project this year, and it was something that was a bit new for Skadden. We don't have a real estate team on the billable side in London, so saying, "Oh, we're going to do housing law now," seemed quite scary. Obviously, supervised by housing lawyers at the charity, but I love expansion and I love sort of taking a step into the unknown, and I really want us to continue doing that going forward. I just think I want to build my external network. There is an amazing network of pro bono managers across the UK. So continuing to meet them and learn from them is really important to me. And also just, I think, educating young graduates on the different opportunities that are out there, and the fact that actually being a city lawyer doesn't just mean you're going to practice tax or banking, which is wonderful in itself, but knowing that you can use your legal skills as well to help those in your community is amazing. And I think something that a lot of graduates don't realize is part of the city life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is such a key one to highlight, of for graduates to know that their roles can be beyond this and they can have a place in the legal profession, even if that doesn't look like city law for them. And, it's great if it does, but there are definitely alternatives. For you, I guess, it's always easier to look in hindsight, but if you had to go back to your 18-year-old self, what do you think you'd say to someone in that position who is in the throes of perhaps applying to city applications and is not entirely sure of what their career path is going to look like?
I think I said it at the start, but do not rush things. You will have many, many years to practice law. So enjoy the experience of studying law. It goes so quickly. I wish I took a moment to breathe, step back, and realize what an indulgence it is sitting in a library reading articles and chapters from legal books is wonderful. And take every career opportunity that comes at you. I've had the pleasure of only ever being at Skadden, and I love every day of it. So I think take the opportunities that come to you within the firm you end up at.
Yeah, and there are so many, like you said sort of right at the start, that you made a lot of applications and sort of you look at a lot of firms. I guess a lot of people are in that position when they're looking at multiple websites and things. There are only more websites now to look at and more information to seek out. How do you think people can best kind of create a list of firms that really they feel like they can sort of fit at when there is just a wealth of information out there for them?
Yeah, it's so hard. I think I'm going to contradict what I said earlier slightly. So I think one thing to do is, if there is an area of law that is something you see yourself going into, first of all, check the law firms you're applying for offer it. So I'll mention him again. My husband works in the sort of tech space. Not all big law firms will offer that. So it's important that if you're going to do a training contract and you want to become a tech lawyer, you're going to need to pick a firm that does have a great IP, GDPR practice. So that's step one. Obviously, stay open-minded. But if you are thinking in the back of your head, I want to specialize, then make sure they offer that. Second one, I do think there's a big difference between UK and US firms. So for me, my list didn't really have many UK firms on it. I did a vacation scheme at one because I really wanted the first-hand comparison, but I knew I wanted to be in a small intake. So that really helps you narrow it down. And then I think I might have mentioned earlier, ask people around you. If you're studying law, especially at university, and I appreciate not everybody does, it's got to be a 50-50 nowadays, but if you are studying law, ask your peers, any mentors you've got, anyone in a lecture hall, find out where they've had exposure from firm-wise, and let that dictate your list to some extent as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, it is a challenge, and there is so much sort of information out there and a lot of information being thrown at you at all times, especially now with not just in-person days, but also so many virtual opportunities. But I think knowing what you want, and that really does help you sort of narrow it down, not just in terms of work, but also, like you said, trainee intakes and sort of that perspective. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, but we always end with a little rapid fire, just to get to know our guests a little bit more and end on a bit of a fun note. So your first question is, if you had to create one law that everyone in the world has to follow, what do you think it would be?
I feel like as a pro bono lawyer, I'm going to go for a bit of like a moral, ethical one. I would love to see a world where you have to treat everyone with kindness and respect, and you are punished for not doing so. So yeah, going to go for that.
Yeah, I love that one. The next one, taking a slightly, taking a bit of a shift. What are the top 3 items on your bucket list? Not necessarily for next year, but perhaps, over the next couple of years.
So I think they would all be travel related.
Mhm.
I would love to go on a safari. I was very close to booking one just before COVID, and it didn't happen. So that would be wonderful. I'd love to climb something, like Kilimanjaro, something for that achievement. And then one that's always been on my bucket list, I've always wanted to see whales in the wild, bit random. But I did manage to experience that last year on my honeymoon, and it was amazing. So yeah, I always say to people, do your bucket list things. They're there for, they're on your list for a reason.
Yeah, I love that of like you've got Kilimanjaro and then you've got Wales. I love that sort of,
Yeah.
keeping it near home and then also going very far away. The next one is, if you had to choose a day that you could relive from your past, which day do you think it would be?
I think I have two. So the obvious one, and I'm sure lots of people say it, was my wedding day. It is so surreal having all of your loved ones in a room. It was just the most incredible feeling in the world, and it goes so fast, and everybody says that. And my other one is actually getting my acceptance letter for university. Because I feel like it's years and years of built up energy and excitement and nervousness, and I have never felt relief quite like it. And it sort of mentally opened up all of the opportunities in my head of what I was going to experience from that point on, and that was really, really special. Great feeling.
Yeah, I love that, and I think those are, two very big milestones for a lot of people. So that's amazing. The final question: if you weren't a lawyer, what alternative career path do you think you would have taken?
Ooh, so I actually do love being a lawyer, but I would love to, in another world, have a job that involves working outside. I think, so like a penguin keeper or something where you sort of aren't at a desk. And I'm fortunate, actually, even as a pro bono lawyer, that a lot of my job isn't at a desk. It's sort of out in the community. But yeah, I think a penguin keeper would be up there.
Oh, I love that. I mean, perhaps that's always one to pursue now that we're in the world of, pivoting and changing careers. So perhaps, one for the future. But I think with that, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on today. It was such an insightful conversation. And I think especially for anyone who not just wants to know about Skadden and your journey into commercial law, but also the pro bono aspects, I think is going to find it really useful. So thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Absolute pleasure.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Whether you listened to it or whether you watched it, I hope that you really, really enjoyed it. And a massive, massive shout out to Olivia for taking the time out to come and speak to us and, share so much knowledge, wisdom, and experience with all of the Commerce Meets Law listeners. As always, please do send your feedback on commercemeetslaw@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram at commercemeetslaw, or you can always reach out on the LinkedIn page as well with your thoughts and any future guests that you want me to have on the podcast. And as I said, your thoughts on the video podcast as well. It's something that I haven't really done yet. I've done, obviously, most of season 1 was definitely all audio. So if there's something you think I can improve upon as well, all constructive feedback is super useful. So please definitely let me know. For now, though, take care and goodbye.